Hi everyone, welcome to Constellation Audio Tutorials. My name is Kevin and we're here to take a deep dive into the world of audio engineering. Today I want to give you guys a rundown of how I use Waves LV1, Logic Pro, Smaart, M32, and Spotify and all of that in a kind of live environment. I'm simulating that here today at my house, but the way I've got it set up right now is how I would approach a gig with LV1 right now. So band to band, the setup in LV1 may change, but more or less this is the process I would use no matter what I was doing if I was using LV1. So first and foremost, the number one thing I do every single gig, no matter what soundboard I use, no matter what anything I use, if it's digital and has an ability to hook a computer up to it, I am going to press a record button. So most of the time, what that allows me to do is multitrack, but at least getting a left-right board mix is my goal. I always want to record for two main reasons. The first is that I want to be able to hear what I did. Obviously, different venues, different things will always sound different. So if I've got a lot of acoustic drums one day, at a certain venue, I might have mixed the drums lower into that board mix or something like that. But I want to try to capture whatever I did, whether that be individual channels, recording to, listen to or mix later, or just the board mix and just hear how it translates to that. In today's world, it is incredibly easy to record and incredibly worthwhile. The number one reason why I do it, though, is for virtual sound check. So yes, I can listen back to it and cool, that happened, but virtual sound check is the thing that I attribute most of my ability to these days. Sitting down, nerding out, listening to a kick drum for an hour, you can do that with virtual sound check. If I asked a drummer to sit up on stage and hit the kick drum for an hour straight, he would probably, not do it or try to hurt me if we got into that hour. So virtual sound check allows the person who's recording and playing it back through the soundboard the ability to hear it as it was, and that virtual side of the sound check is just meaning that it's pre-recorded. So sound check is, I've got analog inputs, they're coming into the console, I'm doing gain, EQ, compression, effects, whatever it might be. But recording individual channels allows me to get that just after that preamp gain, so I don't have the ability to go and change that after the fact, but I do have the ability to go back and do everything else after the fact. So I'm going to run you through my system on how I use Logic to virtual sound check and record and all of that, as well as a basic layout of LV1 and how I approach that. So first, let's turn to Logic here. And in Logic, I personally use Logic. You can use anything. You can use Reaper, you can use Pro Tools, you can use Tracks Live, which is from Waves, which is a great product, although I'm kind of sad they're losing support for that. I personally use Logic only because that's what I grew up on. That's what I taught myself how to do audio on. It does a lot of things, and it allows me, if I needed or wanted to come back in here and quickly remix this if I needed to straight inside the box. Whereas with something like Tracks Live, it's great for multi-track recording and playback, but not mixing or anything else after the fact. So this is why I use Logic. Also for $200, if you have a Mac already, it's fantastic. So here I've got a session that I've already cut up and rearranged and stuff like that, but this is from a live rehearsal that this band did. And so I've got my channels here, and if you're not familiar with Logic, feel free to watch tons of other good videos about it. I'm not going to go super in depth on how the actual program works, but here is how I use Logic for multi-track recording. First and foremost, I want to record everything, and so I actually have in my template, I have a generic template, and then I make one for this band specifically because they're more or less the same channels every time. I just arm and disarm the ones I need or don't need. So actually use the hide feature, which is the H key in Logic, to bring up the show hide of different channels. So I actually have, I run my Mac in 64 channel driver mode on SoundGrid, and that's how it's getting all this audio. And I've got all the inputs and outputs and all that stuff set up already in the template. I've got channels named already, so I'm saving time doing all that. And then I hide all the channels I don't normally need. So in this specific rehearsal, we didn't use the triggered snare at all. Brian didn't use his acoustic. I didn't have a vocal spare set up. I didn't need any guests. We did actually end up using tracks, but I forgot to unhide them and arm them. So my bad. But still, I didn't want to fill up my whole hard drive. This rehearsal ended up being 50 gigs with just the audio I did record. So, but then 38 through 55, I'm just not using, but they're still in here and pre-configured. So should I need them, all I have to do is come in here, unhide them, arm them to record, and with all the rest of them, and be off to the races. And then I also always record a couple different things. I record my Q output, just one channel of that, my pink noise output, in case I'm using that to timeline and things like that. I can look at it after the fact. And also my front of house RTA, which is actually this mic sitting next to me. And then I also record broadcast left-right. This is a stereo file through that through a matrix with some processing on it. And then I record my main outputs, so what I'm actually sending to different speakers. So I've got 4 by default, sub, fill, left, and right. And those are pre-processed outputs. So I'm not recording the EQ and stuff I did to the mains or the subs or anything like that. So this is a full range pre-everything matrix that's receiving that. So one of the main things that I do that differs from what some people might do in Logic is I actually set up all my channels to be routed through auxes. The difference here, so all of my actual individual channels are all still routed to the stereo output. This allows me to quickly come back, like let's say I just have headphones and I plug them into my laptop and I want to listen to a couple channels just raw. I can do that without any other weird configuration and issues. Some people certainly like to route their outputs, just like channel 1 goes to output 1, channel 2 goes to output 2, and so forth and so forth. So, but I actually route them all to auxes, which gets interesting on stereo channels. I'll show you that in a minute. But I actually route them all to auxes in order to have multi-channel playback and stereo playback at the same time. In this specific instance, I do actually do one additional change, and I actually route auxes 1 and 2. Instead of channels 1 and 2, I'm going to 39 and 40 for in this instance, the kick and the snare, just so that I can have this playing back and 2-channel playback from the Mac's audio driver at the same time. There's ways to reroute the Mac audio driver into different channels of SoundGrid, but that doesn't actually apply to all of the apps throughout the Mac. So that's one weird little flavor thing that I found. So I'm actually routing, instead of going to channels 1 and 2 on aux 1 and 2 here, I'm actually going to 39 and 40, but everything else is 1-to-1. The only difference is my stereo channels. So before I mentioned that broadcast is a stereo channel recording, just so that if I had to give it to somebody, it's one channel, so they don't have to worry about panning it left and right and things like that. So I actually send that to bus 59 only and not 60. So again, this is all 1-to-1. So 59 and then I skip 60. So when it goes to 59, scroll down here past these are my stereo tracks here. This is my stereo overheads. I still have aux 60, but I've turned it down and I've actually detached the output. And then I created aux 59 and then I put -60 on there and made that stereo so that the input is stereo and then the output is going out in 59 and 60. The only drawback to doing that is in Logic, you still have to have an odd even channel set in order to make it stereo. So there's some things that actually skip doing stereo, keys in this instance, but there's also a few other things that I'll sometimes skip if it falls on an even odd channel configuration. So that's one little interesting tidbit there. All right, so once again, I've got my inputs. I've got them pre-assigned with the sound grid drivers inputs 1 through 64. I route them to the stereo outputs for all the channels, just in case I need to quickly listen to them. And then bus 1 through 64, I set up, this is all pre-fade sends over to these auxes, so they'll go even if the faders are all the way down. And then, I've just make sure that none of these are going to the stereo output because all their faders are down. Auxes 1 through 64 are going to their designated outputs, except for the exception of, in this case, aux 1 and 2. I'm going to 39 and 40 because I'm not using those channels, and I wanted to preserve driver channels 1 and 2 or outputs 1 and 2 for stereo playback, for background music, anything like that. So that is logic, and that's how I've got it set up. Let's go over and look at LV1. So in LV1, this is my system inventory page. Right now I've got a bunch of stuff that isn't there because I'm not connected to it. But generally speaking, rack A versus rack B here. In rack A, I have that set up to be anything that's physically on stage. It doesn't actually matter what racks you put them in, but this helps me visually identify what things are happening on stage, what things are happening at front of house. So at front of house, I've got a D1, or Digigrid D, which is labeled D1 in here, because there's two of them. There's a second one on stage sometimes. And then I've got my Mac computer with virtual soundcheck and background music playback. And then I've got the local host computer that's running LV1 as well. Right now, that sound grid driver is actually routing to OBS for screen capture. But I also have the ability to play 2-channel content into the console and do other things if I need to. But generally speaking, this Windows computer is only running LV1, and that's it. All right, patching. So patching gets interesting. Anytime you're trying to route audio different places, you got to make sure you're doing it right. My best suggestion is write it out. Make a spreadsheet and write the spreadsheet every different possible way you can imagine, just to make sure you can and do know where things are going and where they're supposed to be going. The patching in LV1 is okay. I do wish we had more ability to name things. Head nod to Dante. Dante's nice because you can see, okay, I'm running kick drum to kick drum. That's what I want. In here, you got to be like, okay, channel 47 is the kazoo, and then I've got a channel named kazoo. Okay, there we go. So for virtual playback, I just want to show. So inputs on the input side of things for waves, I've actually got input A reserved for analog inputs, or normal inputs is what I would also call that. So if the source was always going to be digital, for instance, tracks is going to always be from Ableton through SoundGrid driver into LV1. In that instance, input A and input B would actually be the same, but different. They both be digital inputs, but different SoundGrid driver attachments, if you will. So input A is actually from Hallie's MacBook Pro, and that's not connected, so it's not showing the routes there, but they would show up right here. But input B is actually coming from Kevin's MacBook Pro, which is my virtual soundcheck machine. So I just showed you logic, and here is the patching for logic into input B for all of the channels. I keep this 1-to-1, so channels 1 through 64 are channels 1 through 64 in Logic. Therefore, they play back channels 1 through 64, except for channels 39 and 40, which are actually, instead of 1 and 2, like they normally would be, I've brought them in over here because I wanted to reserve 1 and 2 for my MacBook Pro background music input right here. But everything else is just 1-to-1 up to 37. Now, interestingly enough, why does it stop at 37? Because none of this other stuff is coming in at the moment. I could have it pre-configured. I certainly could. I do have a few other channels that I'm rerouting and routing back into the console. So like I mentioned, I record the RTA mic in front of house and the pink noise from front of house. and those kind of things just do playback through their channels. And then down here, I've actually got the ability to play back. I showed you in Logic at the end there. I record broadcast, and then my direct feeds that I send through the signal flow of the sub, the fill, the left, and the right. And I can actually route those back in to the console, and then out to the speakers if I need to. So if I actually want to listen to my in real-time mix that I already did, so not exactly virtual soundcheck, but more like virtual playback of my board mix, I have the ability to do that, process it through my main left-right, send it to all the different locations that left-right might be going, and hear how the mix sounded in real time, if that makes sense. So that's inputs. Input A, typical input for live in person. Input B, reserved for virtual soundcheck in my instance. All my outputs, I do one direct output, and that is of the front of house pink noise to channel 57 here on the MacBook Pro. I do that because sometimes I'll use the generator inside LV1, so I use that direct output from the channel. It should be noted LV1's direct outputs are post-mute. So even though they might be pre-processing, they are post-mute. So if you mute them, they will not go to your recording. If you want to record your analog inputs straight to your computer, just post-gain, pre-everything, including mute, the best way to do that is device to device. So in device to device mode, I am routing the stage box. It's grayed out right now because it's not connected, but I routed my stage box to the channels of my MacBook Pro in order that I needed them. I did some clever patching here. I wasn't actually one-to-one with my rig because the one stage box wasn't big enough, so I split it up between the second digigrid D on stage and the stage box. Normally I will be using a 32 channel stage box, and then that line will just be 1-to-1. All right, so back to output patching here. So, and then my mix buses, I patched those to a couple different locations. Right now, this microphone that I'm actually talking through is going back into my Mac on channels 1 and 2. So mic to MacBook is an aux that's actually sending this microphone into inputs 1 and 2, which is actually why that stage box wasn't connected to inputs 1 and 2, as I stole it for doing this kind of stuff. And then the other outputs and things like that. So, for instance, on the stage box, I'm routing left and right and sub. In this case, I didn't have a fill, just through outputs 1, 2, and 3 on that stage box. So that's where I've got those patched. And then on the D1 right now that I'm using for my headphones, I've actually got the Q output going there. So when I solo things, I can hear those coming into the headphones. And interestingly enough, if I actually bring up the send that I'm sending to the Windows SoundGrid driver, I'm also sending Q there, which is where I'm going to get the audio for when we're listening to what LV1 sounds like. We're actually going to be using the Q bus to feed that screen recording, because I can solo things and then you can hear what I've soloed. The internal patching page, this is super helpful and a lot faster, and I always forget about it, to be completely honest. But this is a great way to set up mute groups, your link groups, and or VCAs is what I prefer to call them. Matrices, quickly assigning things to matrices, quickly assigning and unassigning things to main, left, right. Like, for instance, these should actually not be going to that. That was the mono and the center and subs and fill and subs in my case. And then so you can quickly see what's routed to where and how it should be working. This is not just a cool game of Tetris. This is actually patching all of these things. So you just want to maybe peruse this every now and again. If you think you got it right through the other page or through the channel page, just jump in here and just confirm that that's what you got. If you want to quickly assign things to mute groups, this is a fantastic way to do that. Last but not least, I do want to show the delay groups. I think I understand how this works, but basically what I did is I want my left and right to be time-aligned outputs, And so assign my left right. So I called it this. I just called it left right. And so I want to assign these two outputs to be time aligned. So anything going to those two outputs, which in this case is the left right bus, those will be time aligned to themselves. Note that I've got another time alignment group that is sub. And so my left, right, and sub are actually not time aligned in the console to each other. I can do that separately here and or add or subtract delay. So this is actually intentional. I actually know right now if I go to my masters page and right click on the plugin area, it says what the rack latency is. So the rack latency for my left right is 5.5 milliseconds and my sub is 4.4, which means that they are 1.1 milliseconds already not together. And then I'm adding an additional 3 milliseconds of time alignment here to get them in phase with physical placement. That was just something I did, and that is something I change every single time I set up the speakers. I time align that stuff and make sure that it's sounding good. Running pink noise through that sub channel and through that left-right channel includes that 1.1 milliseconds. So when I'm time aligning in Smaart, it actually is already taking account for that. And then I get the additional benefit to add or subtract delay from each of those through this page. All right, as far as the actual console layout goes, this may change from band to band and honestly from gig to gig, depending on what is all used and needed. For this specific band, I'm usually the right screen or where it says Mixer 1, that is usually on mix. And then my top screen, when I'm doing this live right now, they're to my left and to my right. But I'll often switch between different views. So I might be looking at rack view in drums, and then I might click on, the vocal EQ or F6 in this case, and it'll bring it up in channel mode. So I always like to keep one screen just as Mixer 1 with faders of whatever things I need at that moment. And then Mixer 2 can jump back and forth between showing faders, showing the channel view where I can adjust different things in the channel strip, show view if I need to adjust scenes or recall sessions, I can do that there. Sometimes I jump into patching, but all the while I've got my fingers on the faders of the Mixer 1 page on the other screen. So that's an interesting thing to see. So I'm not going to dive into exactly what I'm doing on every channel. I'm probably going to have other videos specifically tailored to that. I just want to kind of show the basic general layout of how I'm using LV1. I want to show you now a little bit of how I've got Smaart set up. So on my Mac, I've got another space usually open for Smaart. And what I've got here is I've got Smaart 8 running with the SoundGrid driver as inputs. I've got a couple real quick housekeeping things. Once you've got your I/O configured, so in this case, this is my sort of configuration page. Once you've got it configured, once you've got it kind of set up the way you like it, make sure to go in and hit Manage Configurations and save that. I had an instance today, actually, where I had LV1 going, but it diverted my Mac's SoundGrid driver to 32 channel mode instead of 64. And I opened Smaart, and Smaart lost all of that information that I had set up already. So all of my measurements, my spectrum measurements, my transfer function measurements, I lost all of that. So make sure to save that as a configuration file. It actually is really handy because it saves the configuration, the look, the everything, exactly how you like it. So once you've got that, save it. If you change it, save it again. So with that being said, let's move on. So this is how I like to use Smaart. If you're fortunate enough to have Smaart or to need Smaart, you will probably want to learn all about this. Rational Acoustics, who makes Smaart, has tons and tons of great opportunities to learn through webinars, in-person classes, you can read stuff, you can watch stuff, and you can bang your head against the table for a while and trying to learn stuff on your own. So feel free to do all of that, or a combination of some of those things. But this is how I like to use it. It is by no means an exhaustive way of or training by any means in Smaart. So first things first, I've always got a reference mic set up. Today, that is the thing here. And so that's picking up what's coming through the speakers. Right now that is nothing, because I'm not playing anything, and I'm actually just using headphones for this, just so I don't disturb the rest of the house at the moment. And so right now all you see is me talking. In a normal environment, when I'm doing live sound, I'm running that front of house mic and the Q left feed. So this is the left side of the Q. So what's cool is in LV1, if we come and pull up the Q settings, my alternative input, so aka when nothing else is queued, my alternative input is actually my main left right. If I'm doing a broadcast specific event, I will actually go in and change that to a matrix and listen to what I'm sending to broadcast. But in a normal live sound environment, I'm just choosing left right. And then that gives me the ability, like if I play something right here, so that's going on. It's sounding great. I'm just going to mute the vocals here so that we're not fighting over that space. So right now, I'm going to turn off the front of house mic since that's just my voice talking. But let's pretend that this main left right here is the front of house mic. In this instance, it is perfectly identical to the Q left feed because the Q left is the left right. So so that's cool. I can look at that. That sounds great, whatever. But let's say that the guitar is playing and it's a little bit thicker mix here. And I want to see, oh man, there's two guitarists playing here. Which one is which? Okay, let's solo up. There's something in that guitar that I want to listen to. Now, you're hearing the cued mix right now, but what I want you to show is on this green line, this is still what's going to the PA. This is still what's coming out. The audience hears it, but on Smaart, I can see, quote unquote, that guitar signal. Likewise, if I wanted to go in and let's unsolo that. So this is just just drums here, and we're supposed to have bass. Let's bring that in. And he's not playing right there. That's why. There he goes. All right. So now bass is playing, guitar is playing. They're about to build back in. And there's the keys. Let's say I want to listen to those keys. I can solo that. And I can see frequency-wise what's happening. So if I needed to EQ something inside of a simple mix like this or a dense mix, I could actually hear that. It's hard to hear sometimes in a big, thick mix, but I can see what's going on with so right now there's two guitar parts, so I can solo that other one and see, okay, his guitar is doing these frequencies. I can switch over and solo both of them, or I could clear that and solo just one of them and see the frequency makeup of that soloed input, and still have everything going to the house and still see that front of house mic, or main left in this case, see that reference input, if that makes sense. So that is how I accomplish looking at the mix in Smaart. Now, I also have a signal generator in Smaart set up, and that's in this instance, I'm going to be going to, let's see, I think it's 57, if I remember right. Like I said, I reformatted Smaart on accident this morning, and I've got to get everything back in, and routing the pink noise was one of those things I forgot. So if I turn on that signal generator, I've got pink noise coming in. So that's coming to its own channel. That channel also has the emo generator plugin on it, in case for some reason I don't have Smaart working. But I am receiving pink noise from Smaart here. And then I am routing that in as its own channel as well. The benefit of doing that, obviously I know what pink noise looks like, but if I switch over to do a transfer function, and let's say I want to set up a transfer function that is, it's actually up here in configuration. Again, I had all this set up already, but lost it because the sound driver changed how many driver channels it was. So if I set up a new transfer function measurement, I can actually, let's say that this is main left versus pink noise. All right. So my measurement channel is my main left, and my reference channel is pink noise in this instance. I can find the delay, which is 6.12 milliseconds. If we actually look at my main left output, it says my rack latency is 5.5 milliseconds. So if we do what is 5.5 minus 6.12, so it's 0.62 milliseconds different between pink noise coming in and back out through the direct out, and pink noise coming in, going through the left, right, and then back into Smaart, if that makes sense. But if I insert that that delay, I will time align my transfer function and be able to then see the difference. So now that these are time aligned, I can see that my phase response is correct. I can test different things. I can go in and say, if I route audio this way, does it screw up the phase? If I route audio that way, does it screw up the phase? And likewise, if I go back to the spectrum side of things, I like to have the waterfall up here, so or the spectrograph for those scientifically oriented. So the spectrograph allows me to see in color and time what's going on. So and then the spectrograph's tied to whatever function, whatever spectrum choice is chosen on the left here. So if I choose front of house mic, it's going to barely pick up kind of what I'm saying here. But if I'm, rocking a big loud mix here, I can see that. I can pull up main left, and I can see in time and intensity what frequencies are happening in the mix. So again, I keep all that stuff open on separate tabs of my Mac, and I can just swipe around with my trackpad and see all of that that's happening. In one of the other spaces of the Mac, I have another program called M32 Edit. In this specific band's case, they use in-ear monitors that are mixed on P16 personal mixers from Behringer. In order to maintain that workflow for them when switching to LV1, I have an M32C rack unit mixer with a Waves SoundGrid card in it. And so that, it's not currently plugged in, but I've got the last session open here so we can kind of see what's happening. For the most part, I have everything 1-to-1. The only weird thing is they don't allow you to do even, odd, even, left, right choices. So it's got to be odd, then even. So I have my keys and my bass flipped around, and then I've got kind of everything else 1-to-1, raw, natural inputs coming in. And then I do submix a few things. So in LV1, I'm submixing the multiple stereo tracks that they have down to one stereo track, and then sending that off into the M32C. I'm also sending a monosum of the drum reverbs, both of them, and the vocal reverbs, all three of them, plus the delay, actually, so I should actually read vocal effects. And then I'm also submixing some talkback microphones. I can send them a room microphone if I have that set up. So I can submix all of that stuff, and so those are my last inputs on that. So this application is up and open and running and connected to the M32C at all times, so that if a vocalist needs a little EQ change for their monitors, I can come in here and change just that. If this, that, or the other thing wants different EQ, different compression, different whatever, or checking routing, or we're adding an instrument, I can do that all from here. Last but not least, I have some sort of background music going most of the time at Spotify, but it's just something that we can pull up and play stereo stuff into the LV1. So in this case, I'm routing that into stereo channel on the Mac through that SoundGrid driver card on channels 1 and 2. Again, earlier in this video, I explained how I'm actually routing kick and snare instead of from channels 1 and 2 to 39 and 40 so that those aren't competing and I can have both of them at the same time. If I didn't do that, my kick and snare would also be coming to my MacBook Pro background channel, and that would be problematic. If you've got any questions, feel free to put those in the comments below. If you like this, like the video. If you like these videos in general, subscribe to our channel and turn on that notification bell, and you'll get notified when I add new channels to this. If there's something that you're confused about, or you want to see, or you want more information on, leave a comment. I'll respond to you either with an answer if it's quick, or I'll go ahead and hit up a video and upload that. And if you're subscribed, you'll be able to get that right away. So feel free, like, subscribe, and enjoy other videos. Thanks for watching, guys.